Hello, everyone. So welcome to the LASC event, interviewing for LIS jobs. So the schedule for today is that Jill Klees, the iSchool Career Center liaison, is going to talk to us for about 15 minutes, and she's going to give interviewing tips and other important information related to interviewing for LIS jobs. And then we're going to use the breakout rooms to have 3 sessions, about 10 minutes each, with 3 different partners, and I will give everyone a list of questions that they can ask each other and answer, and then we'll meet back together for the last 15 minutes and we can ask Jill questions or anything else that arose during our practice sessions. And make sure that you can see the chat window so you can send any questions you have to me, and I will do my best to answer them. So here is Jill. Thank you for being here, Jill.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. Hey, everybody. Thanks for being here as well. Good evening. My name is Jill Klees, as Rachel said. I'm the iSchool Career Center liaison. My email address is on the screen, so at any time, you are always welcome to send me an email question, especially since we have about 15 minutes tonight for me to go over some interviewing tips, and there's so much that we can talk about for interviewing, so some additional questions might come up that we don't get to tonight, so definitely feel free to email me those at any time so I can follow up with you. So, oops, let me get this down here. There we go. All right, so I'm going to break down our time tonight into 3 basic interviewing prep tips, because again, there's a whole lot we could cover. But I'll talk a little bit about practicing for your interviews. Secondly, developing answers to common interview questions. Oops, I left out the word interview. Well, that's not a good thing right there. And number 3, about how to get your head in the game. So let's talk a little bit about being prepared. The first tip that I always give to anybody when you're planning for an interview, this is even myself. First tip, practice, 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 practice a lot for your upcoming interviews and be as prepared as you possibly can. I always feel like you can't over-prepare for an interview. I feel like the more you practice and practice and practice, the better off you're going to be when you walk in, the more confident you're going to feel. So, one thing you're going to want to do is to thoroughly understand the position that you're interviewing for and know how you're a good fit. How you do that? You can do that by carefully reviewing the job description as part of your preparation. So as you sit down with some common interview questions, which we're going to talk about, pull out that job description, take a look at it, break it down into sections that you potentially could get asked questions about in the interview. And then identify some specific examples from your past experience that you can talk about as a way to show how you can do that particular piece of the job description. I hope that makes sense. So what I'm saying really is think big in terms of your experience that you are bringing to this interview. So I want you to think about examples of things that you've done in your coursework. Think about things that you've done in your class or group projects. Think about things, oops, someone's got a funny sound on their microphone. I think they need to get muted. Things you've done in your volunteer jobs, things you've done in internships, even things that you've done in your past jobs that seemingly are unrelated to the LIS field. There's still examples in there that you can use and you can talk about in an interview. So here's what I like to do. I like to write down examples of things that I've done from my past experience that I might be able to use in interviews. And I kind of keep a file. I keep an interviewing file, basically. That's like one of my favorite tips. And in it, I keep samples of questions and answers that I've come up with in the past. So when I'm preparing for an interview, I pull that out and I can kind of go back through. And that gives me plenty of different examples to pull from. So just to give you an idea of some of the things that I might jot down in these interviewing notes that I might keep, I jot down things like, who's the most difficult person I ever worked with? And all I have to do on that piece of paper is write the person's name and then it comes back to me. But I use that as an example. Or what's a difficult decision that I had to make? I'll write down a time that I tried something and it didn't work. I write down an accomplishment that I'm most proud of. I write down an example of a time I demonstrated being a team player. So different things like that, and I just keep it in my file. And those are some really important tips that you can use just to get yourself being prepared. So next, you want to find a great list of common interview questions. And I know that Rachel's going to give you all a list in a little bit. She pulled it off of the iSchool Career Development pages. Yay, thank you, Rachel, for that. It's perfect. I recommend using this list as a starting point. You can also, you might not know this, you can also do an internet search on topics like an academic librarian interview question. Say you have an interview coming up for an academic librarian. Do an internet search on it. People post all kinds of information about their interviews. Or even if it was a library page interview, do an internet search and you'll get all kinds of information for it. So that could be helpful for you as well. Another good tip is that as you interview, try to keep a list of the questions that you've been asked in your past interviews. And basically, if you're going to be interviewing for similar types of jobs, you're going to be getting asked similar types of questions. So if you keep a list of those questions, now you have some more questions to practice with and prepare. So a tip that I use when I have my practice questions or my common interview questions, I start by actually writing out my answers. And that just works for my brain. I don't know if that's going to work for your brain. Maybe you want to type it, but I like to write out my answers as a way to start processing what I might want to say. And this way I can go back and kind of play around with my answers a little bit. And then next, I practice the answers. I practice answering the questions out loud. So I'll go in a quiet room somewhere. But you want to start to get the answers kind of out of your head and out of your mouth and see if they actually make sense. And then when you kind of get your answers to questions in a way that you're feeling comfortable with them, here's where you're going to practice a lot. So I've in the past practiced with my kids. If you have kids, like, little kids, and you sit them down and you're like, okay, and just practice answering interview questions in front of them. You can practice out loud in the shower. You can practice out loud where you're driving in the car. I mean, look for opportunities where you can practice out loud what you might want to say. And then don't forget to record yourselves so you can play it back and hear how you sound. I'm keeping an eye on our time here too, because I've got way more information than I know we're going to get to, so I might start skimming over it just a little bit. So the 3 questions I have up on the slide are the 3 that I always recommend people have nailed before they walk into an interview. So the tell me about yourself question. Again, I'm just going to go over this briefly because we don't have a whole lot of time, but really it's kind of an innocent question and it seems so simple on the outside, but it can kind of trip you up. So check out the screen. It's not about your name, where you came from, your major, a summary of your work history. They have all of that. You want to start to tailor the answer to the specific position. You want to highlight some related skills and experience you have, and you want to weave in why you're a good fit. So quickly, here's a good example. This is long. You wouldn't have to even talk this long or say this much necessarily, but you want to keep your answer to about 30 seconds. And don't really repeat what's on the resume, but emphasize why you're the best candidate for the job. I hope you got that. I'm gonna scoot us along because I know we're running out of time. So the other question, why do you want to work here? Or what attracted you to this job posting? Here's some tips to consider, right? What prompted you to apply? You want to be able to articulate that about the position and talk about what's appealing to you and be able to be sure to demonstrate your enthusiasm and your sincere interest in that particular job. Because the interviewer wants to learn about you and your career goals and how this position fits with your plan. So a couple examples here. Here's something you might be able to say. And I'll let you read that on your own. I hope this is making sense. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end too. The third one, why should we hire you? Or what are your strengths that relate to this position? This is always, no matter how they word this question, it's a strengths-based question. You want to connect your experience, your skills, and your interests to the job. And you have to be clear on your strengths and what you're good at before you go into the interview. That's part of your practice. That's part of your preparation. Looking at the job description, understanding the job, and knowing how you fit. So here's a couple sample answers that you potentially could say when you get that question. There's a lot of different things that you could choose to talk about when you get this question. So it's all going to be about you when you practice it ahead of time and kind of prepare what makes sense for you. All right, so I've got about 5 minutes left here. And what I really want to talk about, because the part that I think is super important, is the part about getting your head in the game, right? So we've been talking about some practical things and how to prepare and looking at common interview questions. But I think one of the more important tips is you got to be really clear in your head. You got to be confident, the positive attitude, be enthusiastic. Like you got to walk in there and you got to nail it. And that I think is always the harder part. So here's some tips I have for you. The first tip, you've got to be clear in your head and tell yourself and feel it that you are being interviewed for a reason. Remind yourself that not every person who applied for this position is being interviewed. You beat out a lot of other applicants for this opportunity. So that means there's something special about you. There's something intriguing about you and your resume that the employer was impressed with. They're not going to waste their time and invite every single person for an interview. So the fact that you are getting an interview is a huge sign. I want you to take that in. I want you to embrace it. So remember, they saw something, they're interested, they're bringing you in because they want to dive a little bit deeper. So always remind yourself that you're being interviewed for a particular reason. Number two, the interviewer, believe it or not, people, wants you to be successful. They really do. They are just as hopeful when you walk in the door for the interview that you are the one, that you're gonna like, boom, interviewing's done, we found our candidate, let's move on. They would love that. So it would make their job so much easier if they could just fill it with you and move right on. So I want you to psych yourself up. I want you to walk in there and wow them and believe in yourself that you deserve to be there interviewing for that particular job. So tip number 3 about getting your head in the game, first impressions are made in the first 90 seconds. So this is some of that basic stuff, right? You want to walk in, you make good eye contact, you have a good handshake, you want to be personable, friendly, have a great smile. If you're not sure how you walk into a room, practice it with somebody. Literally walk in, practicing, look at them in the eye, putting your hand out, giving a good handshake. Those are simple things that you could do that you want to have nailed. You don't want to ruin an interview because those things weren't taken care of. So make sure you've got the basics down. Even make sure what you're going to wear. We've heard some feedback most recent months that some of our students, when they go on interviews, aren't even dressed appropriately. Those are the basic things, right, that you all should be able to take care of. And if you have any questions about those, just shoot me an email. We can talk about it. All right, last tip number 4, checking my time again. The interviewer, again, believe it or not, is not trying to stress you out, for the most part anyway. But the interview is not a trick. It's not designed to cause you a great deal of discomfort beyond the normal interview jitters. So remember, the interviewer wants you to be successful. Their main goal is to get to know you, and they need to ensure that you're the right candidate and that you can handle the job. So be sure to practice for the interview. Don't think that you can I don't think you can over prepare, as I've already said. Practice your positive self-talk, tell yourself you've got this, and walk in there and nail it. So much of our interview is really a mental game. It's all about the mental preparation and believing in yourself, knowing how you can fit for that job and why you're a good candidate for that job. So I think Rachel might be pointing this out later, but if you haven't found this section on the iSchool's Career Development site, there's a whole section here on interviewing. In the box, the green box gives you all the subsections that are there. So I just want you to be sure that you know where to find the information you need. And again, there's my email address, so you can send me some questions as they come up. Elijah has a quick question. Are a button-up dress shirt and dress pants considered appropriate attire? Depending on the institution. It often will depend on the institution, but what you're saying actually sounds like that could be a pretty good fit right there. All right, Rachel, I think my phone says I'm at 5:14, so I'm going to hand it over to you so that you can move us along into the next section. Thanks, everybody.
Recording again. So we're recording. And you can either take the mic or write in the chat any questions you have, or just experiences you had while practicing.
Hey everybody, it's Jill. There was a question earlier on and I kind of sort of started to answer it a little bit, but the question was, What do you say when the job you're really interested in is the job the person you're interviewing has? It's making me wonder if the question is, are you not interested in the job that you're interviewing for because you really want the other one? So that's why I was kind of saying, even if that's true, you still want to make sure that you demonstrate enthusiasm for the position that you're interviewing for, if you do want it. And you can keep in mind then, maybe if you get hired, that other position is going to be the one that you're going to be aiming for later on, is kind of what I'm thinking, but I'm not sure if I interpreted the question correctly. Emily says, how do you politely turn down a job that you may want to pursue in the future without burning any bridges? That's a really great question, Emily. You just do that by being honest. So whatever the reason is at the time that you're turning it down, if it's something you're interested in the future, there must be a pretty good reason why at this time you're turning it down. Say, for example, maybe it just doesn't fit with your life, or the commute's too far, or something. So you very graciously turn it down. Thank you so much for offering me this job. I'm really so interested in it, but after a lot of thought, I realized it's just not the right timing for me. I think the commute's going to take me too far away from my family, and unfortunately, I'm not ready to commit to that right now. So I'm going to have to turn this down, but I really would love to keep you in this position in mind for the future when my life is in a better position to be able to handle this job, something like that. So hopefully that answered your question. I'm seeing if there's anything else in here. I know there was something about the weakness question, but I know that was on the information that Rachel printed out for everybody, which was awesome. Thanks for that tip. Let's see. How do you explain employment gap or reason to leave a previous job? So employment gaps. So let me think about this. There's a couple things I'm thinking about. Because one is, if you are having to explain it, that tells me that you already got in for an interview. They've already seen that there was an employment gap on your resume, so they were still interested in you. So that's a good sign. But secondly, honestly, what is the reason for the employment gap? If there's something you're hiding that we need to talk offline about to come up with a good answer, let's do that. But otherwise, if it's an employment gap where you took time out of your life for caring for dependent children, or caring for someone in your family who was ill, or maybe you just took some time off for personal development, right? Maybe you had gone to undergrad and you'd worked for many years, then you decided you just needed a break and you wanted to go travel or take some classes, so what is the answer? And if it's a fine answer to be able to explain to them, just explain it honestly. If there's something that we need to sort of downplay and work around, then let's talk about that offline and figure out how to work that for your particular situation. Or the other part, the reason to leave a previous job. Again, the question is making me wonder if leaving the previous job had some sort of negative connotation to it. Again, we might need to talk about that. Oftentimes, if there was a negative reason for somebody leaving a particular job, I'll work with you to come up with a way that you can just say it and deal with it without the emotional piece. The employer, on the other hand, they don't know the emotional piece. You do. That's what you're bringing to it. And we need to get rid of that so you're not having that come across in the interview. But otherwise, if you can just be honest about why you left, you were looking for growth potential, the job wasn't a good fit, you were ready for doing something different. There's all kinds of different reasons. So again, maybe we need to talk about that offline. Saying I've been in grad school is a good start. That only works for a few years though. Good questions that you should ask the interviewers. On the interviewing section of the iSchool's career development pages, there's a whole section on questions to ask the interviewer. So I'm going to let you guys go find that list of questions. But what I do want to say is that you absolutely want to have some questions prepared to ask in the interview. I say this over and over in my interviewing workshops. It's such a missed opportunity when you get to the end of an interview and the person says, so what questions do you have for us? And you're like, I've got nothing, or I think you covered it. We're really deflated. We're dying to know what questions you have, honestly, because it's kind of like where it breaks us out of our, structure, and we're getting down to some, hey, what do you want to know about this job? It's kind of exciting. So make sure you write your questions down. Otherwise, you might forget what they are. I would write down more questions than you know you're going to get to ask, because some of those questions might get answered during the interview, and you still want to have some good questions to ask. But that's your opportunity to get into, why does that person like working there? What do they like best? What's the culture like? What do people do for fun? I mean, there's all kinds of different questions you can ask, but you want to make sure that when you walk out of the interview, you have asked the right questions so that you know if this job is something you are actually interested in. That can help determine a lot of the questions that you're going to ask. Summer says, I left the previous job because of late work hours. If I share the truth, will that bring me a negative impact for library jobs? Good question. So there's a couple things here, Summer. If you honestly don't want to work late work hours, then you're not going to want to get hired in a job that's going to have late work hours, or the same thing's going to happen again, right? So that you have to take that into consideration. So hopefully the jobs that you're going for aren't going to require you to work really late hours, or we're going to have to figure out what your plan is here, because you're going to come up against the exact same thing. If the jobs you're applying for don't require late hours, then just to say that would be perfectly fine. If the question even came up. So what is the reason you left your last job? I was working really late, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. I was going to school. I had a family. It just took a toll on me, and I just couldn't do it anymore. Something like that. Lynn says, you are interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. Absolutely. It is absolutely correct. Interviewers aren't really bothered if you bring a little notebook into the room. Yeah, I usually do bring a notebook with my questions written down, but I don't open it until the very end when they say, what questions do you have for us? Then I will open up the notebook, and then I have my questions there. Sarah says, were there suggestions for questions to ask at the end of the interview for examples? There are. It's on the iSchool's career development page. Actually, let me go back and show you. Let me pull this down. Oops. Here we go. Questions for you to ask. So it's here in this interviewing section right there. There's some questions right there.
Jill, we can't see your screen right now, so.
Oh, you can't? So I'm not sharing it.
Right. You
Darn.
could just put the link in the chat.
Thank you. Oopsie. And there we go. I lost the chat. Okay. So you guys don't see my screen at all? What are you guys looking at right now then? Is it your handout?
It's just the basic meeting.
Oh, okay. No problem. No problem. What else? Job. Portfolio. Luvelle says, do you recommend we bring in a portfolio of some of our professional work and goals? You certainly can. I think that's always a nice addition. Very few people do that, so it could be a really nice way to set yourself apart. Rachel, where do you look to conduct research on an organization? That's a good question too, Rachel. First you could just do just a plain internet search, but Glassdoor is a great site to use. You can look on LinkedIn actually for some information, and then really just go to the company's page, their About Us page. That way you can learn about their mission, a little bit about their culture, and that might help generate some questions that you want to ask in the interview about the company as well. Liliana says, where can I find examples of portfolios? That is another good question. There aren't actual examples of portfolios per se anymore. The ones you're going to find examples of are those that are going to be online e-portfolios. And I don't mean your graduation requirement e-portfolio, but it's an online portfolio, kind of like a blog where people will post samples of their work. But you could also be very old school and put it in some sort of a binder or a bound something if there were those kinds of examples of your work that you wanted to bring in and physically bring it into the interview and actually open this sort of book up and show people examples, you could certainly do that. I have had people come into an interview and want to open up their laptop and start to show us stuff. Unfortunately, in an interview, we don't have time for that. Usually, like they're 30 minutes or so, and you've maybe got somebody right behind you. So it's unfortunate when people want to do that. So you have to think about what's practical. So sometimes physically just bringing something just to quickly show them and give them a quick visual of your work, that might work as well. Okay. Other questions? We've got like 4 minutes left. And these are great questions, everybody. I appreciate them. Let's see if I skipped anything. Oops. I don't think so. Oh. Here we go. Summer says, I have an upcoming interview as a foundation level library IT, but I have no IT experience. Not sure why they picked me. But can I say I don't know much about it and I can learn it? Yeah, so interesting. For some reason they picked you. I'm always careful about specifically not saying I don't know this or I don't know how to do this, because you always want to keep things on the positive side. But say they ask you some question about something technical, and you could say, I don't have exact experience doing that, but I do have experience doing blah, 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 blah. And I'm certainly willing to learn and can pick things up very quickly. So I would always sort of flip it back into a positive that shows that your willingness to learn and do, and that you can pick it up. So I hope that helps. And good luck on that interview. How do you handle looking for jobs in other cities or other countries? Let's see. There are some great job search sites for other countries. They are listed also on the iSchool site under job resources. And same for cities. So cities, you would still just do your regular job search. You could be using some of the LIS sites. You could use sites like Indeed or Simply Hired, which are more general sites, but still would have LIS related jobs, and you just put in your city. You could also do a great search on LinkedIn, and you could search by the city. So I'm not sure if your question means the networking piece or how to handle relocation questions. I mean, that's a whole other thing. So we can talk offline about that too, Sarah, if there's more specifics around that. Elijah says, spotlight items from your work that you're especially proud of in your LinkedIn profile. If you have one, they'll spot them when they're doing their obligatory internet check on you. Okay. All right, 1 minute left. I don't know if Rachel, if you want to give a closing remark.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jill, and I hope everyone found this useful. I will most likely send out a Google form just to see what was useful and what was not. And Jill, are you still thinking of doing a interview skills?
No, because I ended up covering so much stuff tonight that I would have been covering as well.
Okay.
So I decided not to do a separate one. But people do contact me. I'll put my email in here again. And you are welcome to send me some more questions if things came up that we didn't get to talk about. I'm happy to do that. And there's lots of good, there's recordings to some past interviewing workshops. And then of course the whole interviewing section on the career development site is super good.